Welcome to Davos. I'm Letitia Lynn. I head external affairs at PwC UK, and with me is our senior partner, Kevin Ellis. I'm looking forward to chatting to you, Kevin, about all the goings on here in Davos, the setting for the World Economic Forum. We did one of these live streams last year, and we got really good feedback, because I think, Kevin, it was sort of the insights behind the scenes that everyone really enjoyed. So kind of looking forward to getting into some of that. Just while people join, a few stats about the World Economic Forum. So this year in attendance, there are nearly 3,000 leaders, I believe, and that includes 60 heads of state, 40 foreign ministers, 1,600 business leaders. I'm obviously sitting alongside one of them, and that in turn brings media, comms people, marketers, security. There are also a few celebs within the mix. Amal Clooney, will.i.am, I'm sure many others. And actually, just looking at all those numbers, it gives you a sense of the scale of the whole thing. And I guess that brings me to my first question, Kevin. Davos feels bigger than ever. You know, events are oversubscribed, we've been stuck in really long queues. A few years ago, back, there was talk almost that Davos had had its day, and obviously COVID didn't help. And I just wondered your take on why it's still so popular.
Yeah, welcome and nice to be here again, Letitia, and good morning to everyone. Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think that there are a number of issues going on in the world, whether they're economic or geopolitical, and therefore any opportunity that brings people together where you can kind of meet up from both a commercial point of view, but also from a government point of view, and have lots of different meetings over the course of a day. And as you said, there is a huge turnout here from all different walks of life. So I think, as though it obviously is elite and it's a bit unusual, I'm sure we're going to talk about that, what you do see is that the biggest issues of the day are front of mind here. And I've been in a number of conversations and meetings where you've seen insights on what's going on in the world that you probably wouldn't normally get to see or hear, and also see how other people react to them. So I think anything that brings the issues of the day to the forefront and gets discussion going has to be a positive thing.
Yeah, and I guess some of the issues of the day are kind of the geopolitics at the moment. And, you know, there's some notable guests here, including President Zelensky. I think the President of Israel is speaking today. And I wondered, Kevin, how geopolitics are affecting the business aspect of Davos and how it's feeding into your conversations.
Yeah, no, I've bumped into a few people. Actually, I've bumped into Zelensky and his entourage a couple of days ago, just walking through the Congress Center. So it is an unusual setting from that point of view. Look, I think geopolitics is in every factor of life, and obviously in the economic factors. We've just done our CEO survey, and a number of the interviews I did with journalists kind of said, you know, how has the latest geopolitical concern impacting the numbers? And I think from the economics point of view, everyone is really focused on inflation. I think the news on the UK inflation rate slightly climbing yesterday, even though I suppose the long-term trend is downwards, certainly caused a shock in some of the stock markets around the world. And you can see everyone's very nervous. I think really the priority for business is stability, and therefore any movement that pushes inflation up that implies that interest rates might not come down as quickly as everyone is hoping is probably a bigger factor. So if the geopolitical impact is going to lead to a shortage of supply and then an increase in pricing and then an impact on inflation, then I think it's front of mind for all the business in terms of investment decisions and planning.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, you kind of alluded to, I guess, the oddity of having, you know, the elite in a ski resort sort of thrashing out the world's problems. And I think with geopolitics as they are at the moment, I kind of wondered if that detachment almost feels more extreme. And I mean, what would you say, I mean, to the view that it all seems in a pretty poor taste?
Yeah, look, here we are in a kind of snowy ski resort in the mountains. And as I say, you know, as I said earlier, you can't get away from the fact it does feel very elite when you're walking down the street and you see some of the faces that we've touched on, from Al Gore to John Kerry and others. It does feel slightly surreal at times. I think the important thing is that you can get the world leaders, business leaders, the NGOs, and the people that you want to be part of the discussion, if you can create the right security environment, and again, if there's enough people here to make it worth them coming. So it feeds off itself from that point of view. So again, I think the turnout this year is probably better than previous years. It certainly feels like that in the queues, getting in and out of buildings. And I think, again, the more people that are here, the more it attracts others. And that again leads to those conversations. Again, as a business leader myself, with a kind of client-focused business, the reason I'm here and all the other members of our network leadership team are here and others is to see clients, because if we weren't here, we wouldn't have those client conversations, and that matters for our business. So there's a really strong commercial reason for us, and for the politicians, there's a geopolitical connection reason.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you actually, Kevin. And I think although, you might see some slightly strange behaviours here, there are also lots of really admirable people and behaviours as well. And I think it's the mix that makes it kind of so interesting in a way. Linking to the kind of commercials you mentioned, I'm going to quote you actually from something you said to Bloomberg yesterday. You said, Davos is a trade fair. You get a sense of who's spending, who's buying, who's investing, and who's got profile. So I guess I wanted you to elaborate on this and tell us who these people or businesses are.
Yeah, look, you walk down, this is kind of to, if you've never been here, it's really hard to just imagine, but I'll give you it's a ski resort, right? So if you walk down the high street of a ski resort, and here it's called the Promenade, they're normally ski shops, boot fitting, ski hire, etc., etc. All of those shops have been taken over by businesses and countries and regions. And so effectively, as I say, they're like your trade fair stalls, if you like, as you wander along. And it's interesting, if you go back 3 or 4 years, there were a lot of crypto stalls. There's hardly any crypto stalls this year. A couple of years ago, there was a Man United store. There isn't a Man United store this year. And then you look around and say, well, who's here this year? I mean, AI, I'm sure we'll come back to that, is very prevalent. And then there's even an AI house. And there's lots of companies with a normal name with AI attached to them, which obviously is trying to get footfall. But then again, you kind of look around and you see a lot of Indian regional kind of effectively trade fair stalls, and Middle Eastern. There's a huge neon one as well. So again, that kind of gives you an idea of who's spending, who's at the trade fair. And then also this year, there aren't many stalls for them, but there's much bigger Chinese presence. If you go back 6-7 years, President Xi made a speech, which was a kind of landmark speech at Davos. They've been quite quiet in the last few years, but there's a big entourage from China here this year, and you've seen them walking around. So again, I think it just sees how the world is slightly changing, who's buying, who's selling, who's trying to connect.
Yeah, and I think some of those things in a way you might expect, but it's quite extreme, as you mentioned, the AI and the fact you've got buildings, plastered with AI. And then I guess some of the more perhaps less expected, you mentioned Man United, but also Formula One is here this year. Well, McLaren is here this year. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that.
No, we had the opportunity to go to an event yesterday hosted by Workday in collaboration with their partnership with McLaren. And interestingly, the CEO of McLaren, Zach, was there, and Oscar, one of their 2 drivers, was there as well. And they were kind of talking about their experiences. And I think what really came across to me, just from the conversation, was the fact that they'd used Davos to launch the new livery of their car for next season. Again, that link between kind of business, leisure pursuits like Formula One and what that means, and Davos really coming together in that. There's actually a really good line from Zach, the CEO. He was talking about the cars, and I'm not a Formula One expert, so I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are kind of veterans of Drive to Survive and every single race, like my children. But what came across from Zach was he said, the car we start the season with changes all throughout the season. In fact, if you started with the same car, and you finish with the same car, you'd be trailing behind the pack by miles. So the cars changes about 80% in the season. And he said the way we look at our cars is that they are constant prototypes. And I think there's a really close analogy to a lot of other things you're hearing at Davos. The world is changing fast, whether it's ESG, whether it's AI, whether it's cloud. And effectively, we're not in a world just of transformation. We're kind of in a world of constant prototype. I thought it was a really interesting analogy.
I loved that talk as well, and it was sort of focused on how trust and teamwork drive success, and it kind of really brought to life the fact that this team kind of work on a race car together, so they kind of win or lose together. But I did detect it when Zach Brown was talking about you can make a mistake, when he said but only once. I did sort of detect a slight bit of menace in his voice. But trust, I think one of the reasons it focused on trust, that talk, like so many talks here, is that the big theme of Davos this year is rebuilding trust. And actually, we both went to the launch of the latest Edelman Trust Barometer, and I guess it was interesting that business is still the most trusted institution above NGOs, above government, media, but also there's little trust in anyone's ability to introduce and manage technology. And I guess I was interested in your reflections on those findings.
Yeah, I think the Edelman Trust Survey is a really interesting barometer of how the world is and how people see it. I mean, it's a survey across the world of 33,000 people. I think it's more than 20 years old, and it always launches about this time of year. And if you kind of look at it over the last 3 years, when I've really focused on it, since COVID, employees trusted by their employers, and thus business, is by a long way not only the most trusted cohort in society, but the one that's been rising the most dramatically, as effectively journalists and politicians have been in decline. I think the commentary around it this year was exactly probably consistent with the last 3 years, and those trends continue. Probably more, the differential is even more accentuated this year. I think it was interesting. And then two other factors that they added to it, and I say, don't take my summary, it's probably worth reading it for yourself, because I was kind of picking it up from the debate that Gillian Tett brilliantly hosted, was innovators and kind of science and innovation generally is not trusted by kind of the average part of society. And they probably blame some of the stuff around COVID about how kind of the spin around science linking to, say, social distancing and the like, kind of misled people. And they think that's a really big negative, because again, we are in a world that is having to innovate to save lives, change lives, build on things, and therefore innovation not being trusted and science not being trusted isn't a good thing. And then the other factor I think that came across, I thought, really strongly, and they made it, Richard Edelman himself in his address made it very strongly, is that it's not a good thing for business to be so much more trusted than politics and politicians. And therefore he thought business will have to do more in the future to help politicians be trusted. And again, it's a bit like technology. If innovation isn't trusted, then as a business leader engaging with your workforce who trusts you, helping them trust the technology too is probably a good thing for wider society. And again, there's a number, as we know, of democratic elections taking place in the world this year. And again, business encouraging people to vote, not necessarily being political or telling people which way to vote, but actually talking about it, encouraging the debate rather than kind of in a bubble, is a really interesting angle to it. I hadn't heard that before. So there'll be the two or three takeaways I picked up from Edelman this year.
I mean, I was interested in the mood in the room, because I guess I thought there would be more tech enthusiasts, because, the World Economic Forum is quite kind of forward-looking. But Tom Siebel, one of the panelists, said he put it out. Was quite provocative. Every sort of panel chair's dream. He said, social media is like the worst invention in the history of mankind. And he asked the audience, to put their hands up if they agreed. I was quite surprised. It was about a 50-50 split. I was pleased, Kevin, you were more on the enthusiast, especially since we're on a LinkedIn Live at the moment.
And you were negative, I remember, Ali.
Yeah, well, I do have 2 teenage daughters, and I think that's probably affecting my view on that at the moment. But actually, one of the lines, I think it might have been Richard Edelman who said it, that I took away, was that implementation is as important as innovation. And I thought that kind of connects quite nicely to our CEO survey, Kevin. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we did a CEO survey, and I'm sure you can link to it and have a look. But one of the big standouts, I think, that got a lot of headlines was the fact that UK CEOs, 42% of UK CEOs, said that they are implementing or using generative AI in their business. That compares to 32% across the globe. But more interestingly, versus virtually any other country in the world, there are only 3 countries in the world that are ahead of us, which is Japan, Finland, and Norway. And some of our kind of normal competitors, like say Germany, were at 9%. So I think that was quite interesting. And again, that goes to that implementation being as important as innovation. I think it affects whether the UK is an attractive place to invest in by overseas companies. But also, I think it reflects the fact that we are a service economy largely. And if you're in the service sector, you've got to attract clients and you've got to retain employees more so than anywhere else. And therefore, you've got to have first mover advantage. And I think that's probably driving that number to 42%. Whereas if you're a heavily manufacturing economy, you probably can go second or third without so much impact. So I think you snooze, you lose in the service sector, and that's probably why everyone is saying, even if they're not, but they are saying on the survey they are heavily using generative AI at 42%.
I mean, tech, clearly massive here. Climate change and fighting climate change seem to me at least slightly less high profile on the promenade you mentioned earlier. But I gather in the Congress Centre itself, it was a kind of big focus. And Kevin, we were speaking about some research that PwC globally has been supporting the World Economic Forum with on energy reduction. And you articulated it to me brilliantly yesterday. So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, kind of in a nutshell, what is this all about?
No pressure. Before I come to that, I suppose what I'd say is that quite a lot of the climate change ESG agenda is kind of business as usual. So again, when we were with McLaren yesterday, they were speaking, I think 30 or 40% of what they were talking about was how that they are changing their strategy to be carbon neutral and be at the front end of that, whether that's the e-racing and the like. So I think it's kind of more part business as usual rather than the stall of itself. And again, in the Congress Centre, there's a lot of other events. Going to your specific question. So I think, and again, it came across very clearly, I think, in the Middle East COP that just took place before Christmas. I think the way that people look at climate change is that there's two main pillars. The pillar of you've got to reduce hydrocarbons, and then the pillar that you've got to create renewable energy to give you energy to replace those hydrocarbons that you're reducing. The third pillar that certainly has been something that we've been focused on here, and we're hearing a lot about through WEF, because we're working with WEF, is reducing demand. So basically, if you just deal with the first two pillars and the world keeps growing, population keeps growing, then effectively you're not actually going to turn the dial down on effectively the heating up of the planet. So the kind of line that really resonates with me is that if you reduce demand and every company and person reduces demand, you probably can take the actual demand down by 31% by 2030. The only difficulty is it's quite boring. I mean, announcing the investment in hydrocarbons, announcing a new wind farm is more exciting than just saying we're turning the heating down, or like we did, we're shutting an office over the 2 weeks, the Christmas period, to reduce our demand. So reducing demand is thousands of small steps. And again, we're seeing this and what we're hearing, and we saw it here at Davos, is, I think John Kerry stood up in one of the events and was very positive about the importance of it and the importance of the WEF report that effectively PwC have authored. I'm going to a presentation this afternoon by Al Gore. I think people are now focusing on that third pillar. It's not just about the renewables and the reduction in hydrocarbons, it's how do you kind of turn the power down while keeping the business stream growing and the population getting energy available to them.
And you mentioned it was perhaps more boring, but I wonder if the boringness is part of the appeal to businesses and kind of, senior leaders like you, because actually it's easier to get to grips with sort of, switching off lights and that side of it, the cost reduction. Do you think that's
I think it's kind of being in charge of your own destiny. So loads of businesses, and those businesses that we know and work with, had a huge shock last year when their energy costs went up on the back of the invasion of Ukraine and what it did to energy pricing around the world. And the kind of view is now, you can't tell where the next shock's coming, but there will be a shock because that's what we're all used to now. And therefore, be prepared for the next shock by reducing your energy usage. I mean, there was an Indian car company, I can't remember his exact name, but there was an Indian car company that said, for the last 14 years, I've been reducing by 5% my energy usage in building the car, and I'm now using 95% less energy 14 years on than I was. And again, there's a number of pub groups in the UK that I know have done loads of different thousands of small little steps to reduce their energy usage, so the next time there's a shock, they won't be as exposed to the price increase. So it's things like, I think it's like, take action now to be in charge of your own destiny, because energy costs, whether it's through carbon tax or world shocks, are only going to go one way, and therefore if you can reduce it, your business is better for it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Kevin. Another, I guess, big theme, again, perhaps less obvious for different reasons, it's sort of diversity and tackling kind of inequality. I guess one facet of that is close to my heart is gender diversity. And Kevin, I kind of, again, putting you on the spot again, I'd like you to estimate what the proportion of women here at Davos is this year.
I think it's probably better than it was 7 years ago, but it's still not very impressive. I couldn't tell you.
No, it's actually 28%, but apparently that 10 years ago that number was 15%. And I guess my observation would be, and it's brilliant, there's lots of effort around, there's an equality lounge, and I went to a women in business talk hosted by Bloomberg, which is brilliant, but Davos to me does feel quite sort of macho. You go to events, it is mainly men. There's sort of a sense of sort of one-upmanship, who can have the kind of biggest shop. I don't know, I went somewhere and, I was given a business card and it had that kind of American Psycho kind of thickness feel. And I just, I don't know, I sort of, in some ways, Davos feels quite old-fashioned. And I suppose I wondered your sort of thoughts on that. And
yeah, I think there's obviously it's a journey. I think it reflects on the business world and probably the political world. And it's a reflection of who's here because they are the people in the business. And so I think it's hard to just blame Davos. I think you've got to say society still needs to change, just like we're focused on diversity and inclusion as a business because it's the right thing to do for us as a business as well as societally. And everyone else has to do the same. To just say, if you put all the world leaders together and all the business leaders together and then say, where's the diversity? I think it's probably the wrong way around. So I don't think I can blame Davos for that. I mean, yes, there's some really brilliant inclusive events and gender parity events, and I've been to 2 or 3 of them. They've been fascinating as a father of a daughter. But I would say Davos is really the outcome of where we are in the world rather than an example of it. And as I say, I think the world has to change and then Davos will change too.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, that's fair. Kevin, this is your last Davos, at least as PwC UK's senior partner, and I thought, and I think it's the 7th time you've been here. Is that right?
7th time, yeah.
And I guess perhaps some quick fire questions around that. But I suppose how have things changed in your view during that time?
Yeah, I think
perhaps not such a quick question.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I think it's hard to judge because I think when you first come here, it is such circus is probably the wrong word, but it is so unusual. It's really hard to understand and to get your mind around how you get the most from it. So I think over most of the years here, they've just been kind of speed dating client meetings. Probably over the more recent years. So this year, for example, I actually went for a one-on-one dinner with a client rather than just on the constant cocktail circuit in the evening. So you actually can have a proper conversation. Never done that before. And I've gone into the main Congress Centre and sat through some presentations that probably in the first few years I never did because I was really focused so heavily on just one-on-one client meetings. So, and that way you get the opportunity to bring back the zeitgeist really of what everyone's talking about. So unless you're in the Congress centres, you get a little bit more of a narrower view, I think, just from one-on-one meetings. So I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm in a position to judge how Davos has changed. Probably how I've used it has changed over the 7 years, Letitia.
Okay. And if you could speak here on any one topic, what would it be?
It would probably be the one that I'm probably close to my heart, which is social mobility. And again, Davos is very elite. But again, the people here probably can make a bigger difference. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm probably most interested in.
Yeah. And what's the thing you'll miss the least?
I'll tell you what, my hotel is right at the top of the hill. I always stay at the Ward Hotel. And the main kind of centre is down the bottom of the hill. And this morning I wandered out. Actually, I walked down the road with Tim Ryan, who's my opposite number from the US. He's used to it. He lives in Boston. It was so icy. I felt like Bambi as I kind of navigated this hill. And what was really, really depressing was all these people walking past me at a rate of knots. They're obviously far better on ice than I was. But I won't miss walking on the ice. And you've always got this flick in your mind of how many people I've walked past with their arms in a sling or with their knees in a knee brace. I don't know whether they did it before they came here, but certainly it feels at times quite perilous walking around the village.
Yeah, well, luckily you're kind of last full day, I think, Kevin. So just stay upright while you can. I think that probably brings us to a kind of natural close. But Kevin, thanks so much for joining me this morning. Listeners, if you can read more about our CEO survey, there's loads of that online. You can listen back to this and please. It's on the PwC UK YouTube page. But for now, I've got a train to catch, and I think you've probably got an important meeting to go to.
Yeah, I'm off to a meeting now. So, great to see everyone. Thanks very much for listening.
Bye.